and videos included on this DVD. Here are some examples of the lessons you can expect to find in my class. For this next lesson, we studied the Chinese Boxer Rebellion while we were studying a unit on China. During the actual rebellion, the rebels who were fighting the foreign powers wrapped themselves up really tightly in cloth and thought that they were invincible to any kind of weapon, even guns and bullets. The rebels, however, when they got into a fight and were shot, as here I have the students are throwing paper balls representing bullets at my rebels who are charging forward at 2 steps a turn. Whenever they were hit with a paper ball, they were out, even though I had told them they were invincible and that they all thought that they were invincible. As students, slowly advanced, they were slowly picked off by my foreign power guards, and students died, very quickly. And students got to see firsthand, they got to experience what it was like to be a rebel and also the foreign powers, and they got to see how, the logic and the thinking of the rebels was very dim compared to the actuality of being shot with bullets. This next lesson talks about the Great Leap Forward, or life under Communist China with Mao Zedong. To begin this lesson, students were divided up into different communes where they would be living, but it was actually groups of 6 desks. And Mao Zedong dictated my whole lesson. I had a huge picture of Mao Zedong projected up on my board, and the voice of Mao Zedong, though I told my students I had researched and actually found his actual voice, was my principal. To begin the lesson, we had to get rid of these rich landowners who you see right here, and we did that by the students got up in front of the class and read about what actually happened to the rich landowners in China and how we killed them off. After that, students began working for me, and they worked by doing math problems, as you see on their table. When they were doing the math problems for a minute and a half, they stopped, and then we counted up how many of them they actually got correct. For every correct number of answers, they got a scoop of grain, which is actually Cheerios that they got to eat. However, for every harvest that we did, and we did 4 or 5 throughout the lesson, the government gave less and less back. Now, as you see in the background here, we have a work camp. If students misbehaved in my class or gave lip back to the commune leaders, I threw them into these work camps, and they had to work in there. Inside the work camps or the jail, there were scenarios that students had to read about what actually happened to the prisoners or people in the work camp. Then they came out, as these students are here, and read and acted out what happened to them while they were in the jail or the work camp. It worked out really well because students wanted to be in the work camp, so those who usually, act out or loud wanted to go in there, and then they had to actually go in there and work, not just sit there. You'll notice in these screens that everybody has on the same uniforms. I had a uniform company in Raleigh donate 25 uniforms so that everybody in my class would be equal, as they're supposed to be under communism. So students all had to get dressed up, all had to do different kind of math, different kind of activities all throughout the lesson, and it just worked out to be a really fun and educational lesson for my students. During my unit on Vietnam, I tried to focus for this lesson more on what the actual citizens of Vietnam felt during the war rather than the soldiers. So after a lesson on notes and PowerPoints about the war, students had to do their assignment underneath their desk as they ducked for cover. On my board up front flashed vivid images of the war, bomb blowing up and whatnot, injured civilians and soldiers, and the students were answering the questions underneath their desk. I was actually dressed up as a U.S. military soldier and crawled around on my belly checking on my students, and they were trying on my helmet, and students really enjoyed the atmosphere. There was a CD full of guns and bombs and tanks going off and blasting away in the background. So as they were underneath their desk, they had to duck for cover from the bombs, and there I am in my Army uniform and I was crawling around on my hands and stomach making sure that they understood their assignment. These next 2 lessons are going to show about recreating an actual environment for my students. And here we'll start off with the DMZ, the demilitarized zone in Korea. I bought a bunch of orange fencing and broke up my class in half to have North Korea and South Korea, and students had to sit in the different countries in my class. We're not allowed to talk to one another, and there was landmines labeled all throughout the middle of my classroom so nobody could cross. And via the PowerPoint and video clips that I showed in my class, students understood what it was like to live in the DMZ. Here we have Israel divided up into Israel and Palestine, and that's the checkpoint to enter into Palestine right there. There's the students all crammed together in Palestine. It was very, very little room to maneuver, and I populated that little area, whereas the rest of my class was all nice and spread out. For the people of Israel in my class. And it got students to see that they had to enter or leave Palestine through the checkpoints that provided, and they had to get special permission from the other students in my class to leave. And students really got the concept of what it was like to live under those occupying conditions. For this next lesson, we made international phone calls to people around the world. What we did is we hooked up my laptop to the internet program Skype, and we dialed them on that. And students talked into my headset right here, and when the person responded, their voice was broadcast on the surround sound so that all my students could hear their voice in my classroom. We called up my friends in South Korea and in Australia this year, and last year we also did South Africa, and students got to hear the different accents and learn about culture firsthand from people who actually live there. And while the students were doing that, you'll notice in the background here we had Google Earth up, and we were zooming in right down on what the people were telling us about. And we were able to look up information right there on the internet. So it was a really great experience for my students, and I look forward to doing it again. For this after-school program, I ran the Advanced Humanities program for my students. It was targeted towards my advanced and gifted students, but I assigned it to anybody who showed academic potential. The goal of this was to give students additional work on top of the normal classroom work to challenge them and push them in my classroom. Students were expected to participate, though they were not required to. I had a great turnout of students do this, and I was really, really pleased by the results. And here is some examples of the projects that I had my students do. For our first project that we did, we had students study about the Korean War, and they actually had to create a traveling Korean War memorial. Students did not have a chance to study the Korean War because it's not in our school curriculum, though I feel it's a very important part of American history. Students had to create a traveling Korean War memorial, much like there is a traveling Vietnam memorial. They had to create a 3D model of it, or a model on a poster board. Then they had to get in front of a panel of teachers and pitch their idea based on the cost, the feasibility of their project, the attraction of their project, the materials used. They had to take into scope a whole realm of different ideas and present it to us. Students were graded on an International Baccalaureate rubric, and it was based on their creativity, based on their oratory skills, and also based on their written skills, because students had to write us an essay telling us about their project. Overall, about 40 students participated in this, and the project came out fantastic. This was our initial project to get it kicked off, and it worked out fantastic, and I was super pleased with the effort and quality that my students put out. The Australian project was our second project in our after-school Advanced Humanities program that we were running. Here, students had to first make a replica of their animal that they were studying, and here is our octopus. And what students did was they researched their animal, wrote a paper on it, and then they had to actually make a 3D model of their animal. And when everybody brought it in, we actually made an Australian animal zoo that was edible, and when everyone was done giving their presentations, we got to feast on their animals. What I also assigned on top of this was that students had to read the book Walkabout by James Marshall. It's a fantastic book about life in the outback and how the Aborigines live. And students had to actually read the entire book, take out vocabulary words and metaphors and similes from each chapter, and write me a tremendous amount of work from this novel I made them read, in addition to their animal projects. And I was so pleased at the amount of people who actually did a great job making their animals and doing all the book work, and it turned out really, really good. For the final Advanced Humanities program project, our students created a traveling art museum. For this lesson, we wanted students to focus on their artistic abilities, so we created an art project for them. To begin with, the first week after school, students received lessons in art history and in modern art from our fellow teachers on campus. The following week, students took an after-school field trip to the North Carolina Museum of Art and critiqued the different art pieces in the museum, answering guided questions that we had for our students. For the final finale, students had to create a traveling art museum. Students had to research an artistic style and create a piece based off of that style. When all the pieces were assembled in our school library, we had our museum. Parents were invited to this after-school event, which was catered by a local restaurant, and students explained their pieces to the crowd. It was just a fantastic project, probably the best one that we had all year long. Students were very excited for it. Parents were excited for it. And I just can't wait to continue these projects in the future.